What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the best draft position in fantasy football. So pretty much all offseason, I've been going through, doing a ton of different mock drafts on different platforms, right? Underdog, Sleeper, Yahoo, ESPN, and at this point in the offseason, I have a pretty solid idea of if I had a choice where I'd be drafting in each fantasy football draft. And I know some of you guys maybe are just locked into a certain pick, but I do think other people, if they're doing, their leagues with friends, coworkers, whatever it is, there may be some sort of competition where you kind of get to choose where you're picking, or maybe the order's randomized, but you can kind of trade beforehand. So if you are in a spot where you have some agency over where you're picking, I do think this video can be useful for you guys. And keep in mind, this is going to be my favorite draft position based on like the players this year, not necessarily like just a preference on where I'm picking. So I'm not going to say like, oh, I want to pick early first round because I like getting, the back-to-back picks. This is just going to be more so where I think the value it kind of is through the first like 4-ish rounds of your fantasy football draft. And to be honest, a few weeks ago, I really thought I'd be talking about the early first round as like my favorite draft position. I really liked like picks 1 through 3. This is like 2-3 weeks ago because you were guaranteed one of my big three, which would be Jefferson, Chase, or Christian McCaffrey. And then I also really liked the options at like the 2-3 turn. Unfortunately, over the last few weeks, it really does seem like the 2-3 turn has kind of fallen off. And now I don't really love a ton of the picks there. Like a few weeks ago, you might have had a shot at getting like a Tony Pollard or a Derrick Henry, in the back end of the second round. You also had Ramondre, who was looking like a really strong running back option. You obviously don't feel great about Ramondre, with potential competition coming in. Henry and Pollard have been pushed up. Breece Hall hasn't even practiced yet. He's someone that I liked at the 2-3 turn. And then you could go pick some wide receivers, like T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, but sometimes those guys end up slipping to like the mid, maybe even like late third round. So it's like, do you really want to pay up and get them at the 2-3 turn if on certain platforms you can end up getting those guys like in the middle of the third round? It just doesn't feel as strong as it did, just a few weeks ago. So my new kind of favorite spot to draft is pretty much like right in the middle of the first round. So more specifically, like picks 5 through 7. In my personal rankings, I have a clear top 7. So it's Jefferson, Chase, CMC, who I just mentioned. And then you throw in Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Bijan Robinson, and Austin Eckler. I could really go with any order of those guys. If you want to go the wide receivers first, totally cool. If you want to go with the running backs first, I'm totally fine with it. If you want to swap, Kupp for Hill, if you want to swap Bijan for Eckler, I'm not going to push back super hard. I think all those guys are in a very similar range. So you may not end up with someone from your top 3 if you're picking from, picks 5 through 7. But I think the drop-off from like a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase to like a Kupp or Hill, or the drop-off from CMC to Bijan or Eckler isn't as large of a drop as you're going to see from like the mid-second rounders to the guys going at like the 2-3 turn. So I'd much rather pair a wide receiver like Cooper Kupp with a player like Tony Pollard than pair Justin Jefferson with Ramondre Stevenson. That's just my personal preference. Like same thing at like if you go running back early on, I'd rather pair Bijan Robinson with Amon-Ra than pair Christian McCaffrey with Jalen Waddle. I just think the fall off is less severe from like the early to mid first round compared to the mid to late second round. And then I also think like the picks 5 through 7 area carries really solid value into rounds 3 and 4. When you're looking at the players that might be available for you in the third round, you have guys like Chris Olave, T. Higgins, Breece Hall, Mark Andrews, Jahmyr Gibbs, Calvin Ridley. Like those are all picks I feel really solid with in the middle of the third round. And actually all of those guys I just mentioned are top 29 in my overall player rankings. So like at worst, you're pretty much picking them at where I value them. But I think, some of them, like I have as back end round 2 guys that are going to be available in like the middle of the third round. And I've kind of noticed that since the elite quarterbacks like your Patrick Mahomes, your Jalen Hurts, your Josh Allens, a lot of them go as like second round options, maybe early round 3. And so I view them as like mid third rounders. So when they get pushed up, a lot of the other positions kind of fall to me in terms of where I value them personally. But I also think once you get to the fourth round, you're also going to have the opportunity to grab an elite quarterback. So you're really not missing out. Like, I think there's also really strong wide receivers when you get to the fourth round. Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, compared to like the late fourth round, where I think the wide receivers also fall off because you go from Ridley, Allen, Cooper to guys like D-Hop, DJ Moore, Jerry Jeudy, Christian Watson. And once you get into that tier of wide receiver, there's not a lot of consensus. So you may have to reach and pick someone in the early fourth round when some of those guys probably are going to end up falling to the mid fifth round, and you're pretty much going to be looking at the same pool of players. Like I said, you can also look at quarterback. Lamar has the potential to fall. Justin Fields is going in that range. I wouldn't recommend picking Justin Herbert there, but you do have the opportunity, and he is a guy who honestly could fall to the fifth round. So that's kind of my initial thoughts here, and I'm going to go through a few mock drafts from these picks. So let's just dive into the mock drafts. We're going to start off with the one from the fifth pick. Keep in mind, this is going to be PPR scoring. This is a 12-team mock draft, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and then you're starting 2 flexes, and then obviously a tight end also. So in this specific mock, I tried to switch it up for each 3. So we started like double hero RB here. So we went Bijan Robinson at the 105. Keep in mind, this is the beauty of picking in this range. You don't necessarily have to go running back. You don't necessarily have to go wide receiver. If you prefer Eckler, he was available. If you prefer Kupp, he was also available. So I go Bijan in round 1. Then I snagged Tony Pollard in round 2. You can kind of see the value start to fall off towards the back end. Like Chris Olave goes at the 209, Jacobs at the 210, Devonta Smith at the 211. I feel a lot more confident with Tony Pollard at the 208 compared to those guys going after him. Then in the third round, we get a falling Mark Andrews, which for me is going to be a smash draft pick every single time. So through 3 rounds, we have no wide receivers, but I feel decent about the wide receivers that could come back to us. I would say this is definitely our weakest fourth round pick of the 3 drafts. I really like the first 3 rounds, but unfortunately, all those wide receivers who could have been available, like Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, they were all drafted before our 4th round pick here. And even a guy like Deebo Samuel, who I don't love, but I still would have been interested in at this price, he went right before us. So we end up going with Christian Watson, and I do think this was the one draft where that 4th round value did not come through, unfortunately. But then we just hammered the wide receiver position. Obviously past like the 4th, 5th round, the draft position isn't playing a huge role, but we hammer out wide receivers, so we go Watson in the 4th, Mike Williams in the 5th, Deontay Johnson in the 6th, Christian Kirk in the 7th, then Elijah Moore in the 8th. We already had an elite tight end position. We needed a quarterback. I went with Deshaun Watson, and then we draft some running backs, Damian Harris, Jerick McKinnon, Jalen Warren, and then Rondale Moore as our last wide receiver. So I would say in terms of like the first 4 picks, this was probably my least favorite just because I don't love the value on Christian Watson. He's a guy who probably could have been available in the 5th round. But let's move on to the 6th overall pick. So this is also PPR scoring. Same roster setup, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, and 2 flexes. So instead of going 2 running backs through 2 rounds, I switched it up in this one and I went 2 wide receivers. So I went Cooper Kupp at the 106. Then I went with Amon-Ra St. Brown at the 207. Like the value on both of those picks. Then I didn't want to get into a spot where I'm having to force running backs in the middle of rounds. So I went with Jahmyr Gibbs in round 3. I'm totally fine taking Gibbs there. I'd consider him early 3rd round. So I like the pick. And then we got to the 4th round, and we actually had a couple options here. Could have gone Lamar Jackson or Keenan Allen. Since I knew there was probably going to be wide receiver value in the middle rounds, I ended up going with Lamar. If you prefer Keenan Allen, that's totally fine. But just kind of pointing out there were 2 really strong options, that you could choose from. So I go Lamar in the 4th, Jeudy and Mike Williams in the 5th and 6th. Then we get a solid value on Rachaad White to be our running back 2. Then I snag David Njoku to be our tight end. And then we go Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, and then wrap it up with 2 running backs, Tyler Algier and Jalen Warren. So through 4 rounds, really like this one. Cooper Kupp, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, then Lamar Jackson. Really like the value on all those picks, honestly. And then moving into our final mock draft from the 7th pick, once again, same roster setup, PPR scoring once again. The first one, we went 2 running backs. Second one, we went 2 wide receivers. This one, we split it. So we go Bijan Robinson at the 107. Now, this draft, we didn't really have any choice with that first round pick because I said we had a clear top 7. the other 6 guys of that tier went with the first 6 picks. So Bijan was the guy. But like I said, I'm very confident with every player in that tier, so I don't mind snagging Bijan there. Then in round 2, I went with Garrett Wilson. Now, if this was a real draft, I definitely would have considered Derrick Henry or Tony Pollard over Garrett Wilson, but I just wanted some variance, and also just to point out that there were other solid options there. Like if you do prefer Henry or Pollard, like obviously those are picks you could have made in that spot. I went with Garrett Wilson, just for some variance. Then in round 3, I went with Jahmyr Gibbs again. Once again, didn't want to get into that spot where we didn't love the running back position. Then rounds 4, we get Keenan Allen. Love the pick there. You can also see Deebo Samuel is there. Then some guy in the mock draft, kind of went a little wild. Went Richardson, Dalton Schultz, 4-5. Really didn't affect much here because I think they ended up booting him after that. But so through 4 rounds, I really like it. Bijan, Garrett Wilson, Jahmyr Gibbs, Keenan Allen, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. Then we go Jerry Jeudy in round 5. And another point about the middle of the first round in terms of draft position is that Jerry Jeudy's a guy you're going to have to consider if you're picking like in the early first round, which would then be closer to the 4-5 turn. So you're going to be considering your Jerry Jeudy's, your Christian Watson, Mike Williams, all of those guys. But the odds are that one of them is probably going to fall, or multiple is honestly going to fall back to you in like the 5th, maybe even 6th round. Then 6th round, I just like the value on J.K. Dobbins. Typically, I'm not going running back too often in like rounds 5, 6, 7, but I like the value there. Went Christian Kirk in round 7, Deshaun Watson to be the quarterback, Zach Charbonnet at running back, then we go Elijah Moore wide receiver. We kind of punted the tight end position. Unfortunately, we didn't get Dalton Kincaid, who I wanted as a late round option, so just snagged Tyler Higbee and then Gerald Everett, and then also Jaylen Warren. So obviously the tight end position is weak on this one, but kind of more importantly, we're looking at the draft position and the first 4 rounds, which I do really like in this draft. So those are going to be the mock drafts. I do believe that the mid-first round is kind of where I want to be. I think you're guaranteed an elite option in the first 7 picks, but then I also think you're guaranteed a second top option in the 2nd round. And then I just think the value lays out really nicely for you in the 3rd and 4th round. So that's my thoughts. How are you guys feeling? Do we like the middle of the first round? Do you guys have a different spot that you've kind of enjoyed picking from? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you enjoyed, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.